U.S. Vice President JD Vance and his wife will be visiting an American military base in Greenland. According to Assosicted Press, they left from Joint Base Andrews on Friday morning. The visit on Friday was revised after an initial 3-day trip to the semi-autonomous Danish territory created uproar among Greenlanders and Danes who were irked that the travel plans were announced without previous consultation. Relations have been tense after President Donald Trump repeatedly suggested that the United States should in some form control the mineral-rich Danish territory. The one-day visit to the U.S. Space Force outpost at Pituffik, on the northwest coast of Greenland, has removed the risk of potentially violating diplomatic custom by sending a delegation to another country without an official invitation.
US Special Envoy Richard Grenell believes that Ukraine never had nuclear weapons, and the arsenal it once had always belonged to Russia. Politicians and diplomats have reacted emotionally to these statements, according to the politician's social media page on the platform X. In his post, the diplomat decided to clarify the situation with the Budapest Memorandum. The nukes were Russia's and were leftovers. Ukraine gave the nukes back to Russia. They weren't Ukraine's. This is an uncomfortable fact. Grenell wrote, "This position of Donald Trump's special envoy sparked a resonant reaction on social media X among politicians and diplomats. In particular, former US Ambassador to Ukraine, Stephen Pfeiffer, stated that Grenell was categorically wrong. The diplomat who helped negotiate the Budapest Memorandum added that the nuclear warheads in Ukraine were former Soviet, not Russian. Nuclear warheads in Ukraine were ex-Soviet, not Russian. Warheads in storage were in sole Ukrainian custody. ICBMs and bombers were eliminated in Ukraine except a small number sent to Russia for debt relief," the diplomat wrote. He emphasized that Ukraine decided to send the nuclear warheads to Russia for disposal, largely because Moscow had committed to respecting Ukraine's sovereignty and territorial integrity and not using force against the country. He advised Grenell to study history in full. Former Republican Congressman Adam Kinzinger expressed strong criticism of Grenell. "They were Soviet, you ignorant ass helmet," he wrote. "So they were equally Ukraine's as Russia. This is day one knowledge." Kinzinger added that the nuclear weapons were Soviet and were inherited by the countries where they were stationed: Russia, Ukraine, Belarus, and Kazakhstan. However, operational control over the strategic weapons remained with Russia. British politician and former leader of the UK Independence Party, Henry David Bolton, also expressed his outrage. This man, despite his 1.7 million followers, has his facts completely wrong. Either that or he's intentionally deceiving you. Those nukes were absolutely not Russian. They were inherited by Ukraine when the Soviet Union broke up. Don't believe me? Then do your own research, he said. Ukraine inherited the third largest nuclear arsenal in the world after the US and Russia from the Soviet Union. In the early 1990s, the country possessed around 2,000 nuclear weapons, including intercontinental ballistic missiles and strategic bombers for their delivery and launch. On December 5, 1994, Ukraine, the US, the UK and Russia signed the Budapest Memorandum. Under the agreement, Ukraine voluntarily gave up its nuclear weapons in exchange for security guarantees from the signatories. Specifically, Russia pledged to respect Ukraine's independence, sovereignty and territorial integrity and to refrain from threats of force or its use against the country. Moscow also promised to avoid threats of using nuclear weapons. The US and the UK provided Ukraine with security guarantees, stating their readiness to assist the country in the event of aggression. However, the Budapest Memorandum lacked procedures and mechanisms for responding to violations, which made it an ineffective tool for ensuring Ukraine's security. The growing tensions between the United States and Iran have sparked fears of a potential military conflict. Signs indicate that both nations are preparing for a major confrontation with military buildups, strikes, economic sanctions, shows of military force and diplomatic breakdowns. Newsweek says that the US has significantly increased its military presence in both the Gulf and Indian Ocean, deploying B-2 stealth bombers, cargo planes, and aerial refueling tankers, alongside key assets like the USS Carl Vinson and USS Harry S. Truman aircraft carriers. These moves signal heightened US preparations. In response, Iran has bolstered its military capabilities, positioning advanced air defense systems around the Strait of Hormuz while ramping up military activities in the region. The US and Israel have both escalated their military operations in the region. In Gaza, Israel's ongoing airstrikes on Hamas targets have drawn broader regional involvement, with Iran's support for militant groups adding a layer of complexity to the conflict. Iran's support for various proxies in the Middle East, including Hamas, Hezbollah, and militia groups in Iraq and Syria, has been a consistent point of contention. The US has recently stepped up attacks on the Yemen-based Houthis, which are backed by Iran. Economic sanctions have played a pivotal role in the US-Iran standoff. Following Trump's withdrawal from the JCPOA, the US imposed stringent sanctions on Iran's oil exports, banking system, and military industry, aiming to cripple its economy and force Iran to comply with nuclear restrictions. These sanctions have led to a severe economic downturn in Iran, but they have failed to bring Tehran to the negotiating table. Both the US and Iran have engaged in significant military posturing. The US has conducted multiple B-52 bomber flyovers near Iran as a show of strength and to signal potential military action. Additionally, US forces have joined with Israel in large-scale drills involving strategic bombers and fighter jets. On the other side, Iran has conducted joint naval exercises with Russia and China in the Gulf, further bolstering its military capabilities. Iran has also showcased its missile strength by unveiling missile cities, which house its growing arsenal of long-range missiles, and conducting missile tests. These military displays serve as a warning to the US and its allies. Diplomatic relations between the US and Iran have deteriorated since the US pulled out of the nuclear deal in 2018. Despite some attempts at renegotiation, Tehran has rejected US demands and has increasingly turned to Moscow and Beijing for support. Recently, President Trump revealed that he had sent a letter to Tehran, demanding a new nuclear agreement within 2 months, or face significant military consequences. With negotiations stalled and the deadline looming, the diplomatic window for de-escalation is quickly closing, leaving military action as an increasingly likely outcome. As military forces build up on both sides and sanctions continue to bite, the risk of direct military confrontation between the US and Iran grows. Trump has put a knife to Ayatollah Khamenei's throat. A large-scale group of B-2 Spirit stealth bombers, which only the US has and which are called doomsday weapons, are heading towards the island of Diego Garcia in the Indian Ocean, within reach of Iran and Yemen. The bombers were spotted en route to the island. Satellite images show that at least 3 C-17 transport planes and 10 refueling planes have been deployed over the past 48 hours on the strategic British territory, which has repeatedly served as a springboard for US attacks in the Middle East in the past, due to its proximity to Iran and Yemen. In addition, the crews of 2 B-2 bombers with call signs Pitch 11 and Pitch 14 were heard on publicly available audio recordings talking to air traffic controllers in Australia. The crew of Pitch 11 also confirms the presence of a 3rd bomber. Apparently, the trio were all refueling in the air over Australia, heading west